When I was in college, the summer after my egg had fully cracked, I had a stint where I was couch hopping. Not technically homeless, as my friends were very cool and understanding, but not exactly fully stable either. I hadn't come out as trans yet, but it was looming over me, and I had a choice between crashing on a few friends' couches or going back to live with my parents. My relationship with my parents had been rocky the last few years, so the choice was obvious. I crashed with my friends over the summer, scrounged pocket change for the occasional trip to the local burger joint, watched a metric fuck ton of Supernatural to impress a girl I was crushing on, and drank a little more than I should have. I ended up coming out to my friends, who were mostly very accepting, and eventually worked up the courage to come out to my parents, which had a 50% success rate. Definitely could have been worse, but coming out to my mom was miserable. That summer was not my most homeless summer, or anywhere near my worst summer. I remember that summer pretty fondly overall, but it's the summer that comes to mind first when I listen to the following verse from The Sharpest Lives.
Well, it rains and it pours when you're out on your own. If I crash on the couch, can I sleep in my clothes? 'Cause I spent the night dancing, I'm drunk, I suppose. If it looks like I'm laughing, I'm really just asking to leave.
My couch hopping story is not as dramatic as the portrait painted in this song, but the fundamentals are all there. There's a listless feeling that comes from an experience like this, where you don't feel like you really have a solid foundation to return to, but the connection you have to the people in your life who are willing to put you up still gives you a semblance of security. This is an incredibly common experience for queer people, especially other trans folks. Spend any time in trans spaces online and you can and will see how often we are working to find roommates, couches to crash on after evictions, or help making rent at the start of each month to make sure we aren't homeless. I was too much of an autistic homebody to go as wild as the character described in The Sharpest Lives, but when you aren't sure if you'll have a bed to sleep in each night, indulging your vices, whether that be watching too much television, drinking and partying all night, or sitting and longing after your crush without making a move, just makes sense. When you're that fundamentally insecure in your basic needs, you're already living each day as if it's your last. Why not make it a night worth remembering? Because you justify. If you make every night worth remembering, won't that make for a memorable life? The Sharpest Lives is an anthem to the messiest fucking queers. The faggots who have no intention of ever putting their lives together. The trannies who butt up against the fabric of societal expectations and cut through them like a razor. The second half of the chorus sums up the effect of this kind of life perfectly. It's my favorite song on the album. I came to the Black Parade much later in time than a lot of its biggest fans. During the heyday of My Chemical Romance, I was a sheltered kid going to a Baptist high school, and when I ventured out to discover non-Christian music on my own, I gravitated to rap and hip-hop far more than rock, and never really got into emo rock outside of the Christian crossover screamo band Underoath. I did hear the big hits from the Black Parade, like its title track and Teenagers, and enjoyed what I heard, but the songs didn't resonate with me at that age, and I never dug deeper into their music. The Black Parade found me right when it could affect me the most regardless. In 2017, after dropping out of college, moving back in with my parents despite my mom's continued denial of my gender, and getting a job doing chat support for a company I hated, I decided to dive into their music because the trans guy I was dating at the time was a massive fan of their work, and I wanted to know why he and so many other people loved MCR and the Black Parade so much. The album spoke to me immediately, and I was obsessed with it, listening to it on repeat, buying the songs from it on Rock Band 4 so that I could belt out Teenagers when playing that game with my siblings, and committing every meaningful musical moment to memory. I was far from the communist I am now back when I found this album, having come out of the 2016 election as a deeply disappointed and traumatized Hillary supporter. But it spoke to me on those topics in a clear, emotional way that I can only fully understand now that my politics have become far more radical. There is a lot in this album that, when taken in the context of the time, reads as a clear criticism of the Bush administration and the Iraq War. Anti-war sentiment is a theme of a few particular songs, but the entire album is filled with lines about unforgivable sin and mortal ideation. There's not a line that can be specifically tied to the Iraq War, but in 2007, the full cost of the war was beginning to emerge, and it's easy to see a clear association between expressing that unforgivable sin has been committed and the horrors of war the Western imperial world was committing upon Iraq and Afghanistan. The title track itself also calls to mind two specific images, one likely intended and one impossible to intend: the anti-war protests against the Bush administration and the Occupy Wall Street movement that would begin 4 years after this album was released.
A world that sends you reeling from decimated dreams. Your misery and hate will kill us all. So paint it black and take it back and let's shout it loud and clear. Defiant to the end, we hear the call to carry on. We'll carry on. And though we are setting on, believe me, your memory will carry on. We'll carry on. And though we are broken and defeated, your weary widow marches.
The entire song paints a picture of a leaderless protest movement that feels ripped from contemporary headlines, but the imagery is so poetic and subject matter continually relevant that it feels just as applicable to later protest movements as well. You could even choose to interpret this as being about black liberation movements after the death of Dr. King, Fred Hampton, Malcolm X, you name it, and the way the women they loved and worked with carried on their legacy after they were assassinated. Decimated dreams and misery and hate feel particularly pointed as lines against the Bush administration, and they show a far clearer understanding of the Iraq War than a lot of other contemporary critics. Bush himself was a buffoon, and a lot of anti-war and anti-Bush coverage at the time focused on this aspect of his presidency above all else. But the Iraq War was far from a buffoonish blunder. It was an intentional imperialist invasion, spearheaded by members of the administration who sought profit and bloodshed above all else, and sold a propagandistic narrative to corporate media that shaped public opinion of the war extremely effectively. Watching the world powers as a whole accept the narrative of terrorism and non-existent weapons of mass destruction, while you and your peers see the obvious lies for what they are, well, it's absolutely miserable, and it will drive you to a dark place if you don't hold on to the hope that change is somehow possible.
That's all right. That's all right. That's all right.
Maybe the single moment that speaks the most clearly to the album's anti-war sentiment is this passage from Mama.
Well, mother, what the war did to my legs and to my tongue. You should have raised a baby girl. I should have been a better son. If you could count on the infection, naked, amputated ones. You should have been, I could have been a better son.
It's a poignant verse and encompasses so many of the themes of the album at the same time. Gerard Way is expressing the horrific nature of war and how it mutilates and destroys humanity. The rest of the song as a whole continues this exploration and makes it clear how war makes all its participants victims, focusing on the experience of a soldier who has committed atrocities as part of his duty and is writing to his mother seeking absolution. If there's anything to criticize here, I would say that this is a distinctly 2007 perspective, as the focus on the experience of veterans does not take into account the true scale of suffering of the Iraq War that was inflicted upon the Iraqi people. Yet even with that criticism in mind, the song is written so broadly that while it calls to mind the specific horrors of the Iraq War, it also uses its music and instrumentation to call attention to the horror of war in general, painting a picture of an Eastern European soldier fighting in World War II. The clear perspective and empathy for this soldier, who has done horrible things in the name of preventing fascist expansion, expresses the destructive nature of war very effectively, as even this soldier fighting for an extremely righteous cause has been left devastated by the experience. And somehow, that's not even the most resonant part to me. Instead, what sticks with me is the way the soldier struggles with the expectation placed on them because of the gender they were assigned at birth. The entire song is about exploring this relationship to their mama, and how their relationship has always been fraught because of the fact that they wish they'd been born as a girl, and cannot live up to the expectation of being her son. It is, to put it simply, incredibly gender, and is far from the only moment in the album that can be read as specifically trans-feminine. I mean, just listen to this line from Teenagers.
The boys and girls in the clique, the awful names at the stick. You're never gonna fit in much, kid. But if you're troubled and hurt, what you got under your shirt?
Wait, sorry, wrong version of Teenagers.
But if you're troubled and hurt, what you got under your skirt won't make
Obviously, I know this is a change in the lyrics made by a much more out Gerard Way, who has grown far more comfortable in their genderqueer identity. But even if you throw out that updated version, the album drips with queerness and trans femininity. If you listen to the album and pay specific attention to the lyrics about being a man or a boy, the experience is consistently painted as a burden. It is a cross to bear to be cursed with this masculine gender, to have had this identity thrust upon you at birth. But as expressed in the album, it is a cross that you still must bear as part of your existence in the world. And like, that's egg shit. That is the kind of thing you tell yourself as a trans person before you've accepted the fact that you're trans. That your gender is a burden to bear, but you must bear it. That everyone feels like their gender is a burden and exhausting and a terrible experience with next to no good associations. And they are all fine with it, so you have to be too. But it's not true. You can just be a girl. You can just be a boy. You can just be non-binary. You can be a fucking bisexual lesbian and be girl like me. I came out to my mom twice in 2015. The first time I tried coming out to her, I was incredibly direct and straightforward, cutting to the chase and telling her that I was trans and wanted to be referred to as a girl. She responded by trying to immediately gaslight me, telling me that me telling her so directly and cutting straight to the point was proof that I wasn't a girl, because girls don't get straight to the point when talking about things and beat around the bush rather than directly addressing the issue at hand. I didn't talk to her for almost a month after that. I tried again the next time she came down to my college town to visit. I'd read a bunch of Tumblr posts by trans people explaining our place in history, how we'd been continually erased by imperial Christianity, and that there was far more than just one way to be a girl. She refused to listen. I ran to my bedroom and started wailing in my closet. I had told her that if she didn't accept me, that we couldn't have a relationship with each other, and I waited for her to either leave or apologize to me. She half-assed an apology and has never used my name or pronouns. I basically avoid speaking to her as much as I can. It is hard to be trans. Coming out is always the hardest part. The contingent of people who aren't going to accept your identity or will push back against you in subtle and hurtful ways and then try to blame you when you call them on hurting you is always going to be there. I lost more than just my relationship with my mom over being trans, and even lost friends who I thought were good allies because I tried to stand up for myself when they policed my behavior. I don't want to ever police someone else's behavior, and especially not their expression of gender. I am pretty firmly on the side of radical gender politics and believe that our entire conception of gender and socially acceptable behavior needs to be thrown out in favor of radical acceptance and assistance. Even gender isn't the only thing I see as needing radical change here. Our societal conception of what is healthy behavior is fucked from the jump, and we are far too quick to demonize those with mental illnesses and push them into harmful institutions like prisons, mental hospitals, or worse, homelessness. That's not just me talking about people with depression or anxiety either. I want to make it extremely clear that I am throwing up a banner of love and support to folks with any sort of mental illness. Schizophrenics, BPD bitches, bipolar or borderline, people with antisocial personality disorder, plural systems, and autistic people. I love every single one of you, and I hope that you feel safe and included here. When those of us who are out on the edge of society assert our right to exist, our right to dignity, and our right to have our basic needs met, even if we're unlikable and mean, there will always be pushback. Pushback from people who think they know better than us what we need and how those needs should be met. And they're wrong. I learned this lesson a long time ago when I was put in a mental hospital for being suicidal and having violent, intrusive thoughts about another person. I know what's best for me. There will always be people who try to insist that they know what's best for us without even thinking to talk to us and ask us for ourselves. And something I believe very strongly is that when we encounter those people, we will have to let them out of our lives. It will hurt. God, it will hurt. But we will be better off for it. There is so much about the Black Parade that is left to be said, but I think the album is better off speaking for itself than being spoken for. There's a whole interpretation of this album that's the official interpretation, about a character called the Patient dying after a long and complicated life, and my alternate interpretation of a queer activist coming to his mother's deathbed and seeing her die of cancer, while grappling with the complex relationship with this abusive parent who left a traumatic mark on their life. But the thing is, that's all interpretation that comes off best by listening to the album itself and paying attention to the lyrics and the music. The narrative you get out of the Black Parade is incredibly rich because it's packed with meaning, but the meaning you draw from it yourself will always be more valuable than whatever you read on Genius.com or listen to a video essayist tell you about. The feelings and thoughts I've shared here are just where this album takes me to, naturally, as it inspires me to think about queerness, transness, anti-war sentiment, revolutionary politics, and the need to let people out of your life when they refuse to accept you for who you are. To ask if the Black Parade holds up is honestly an incredibly foolish question. If it didn't hold up, I don't think that anyone would still be talking or thinking about it in 2024. It holds up because it inspires discussion, because it invites interpretation, and because it is intrinsically interesting. Doesn't hurt that it also still goes extremely fucking hard.